everybody, and welcome back to the Katie Wheeler Accessibility Podcast. My name is Katie Wheeler, and I'm your host for this show where we talk about accessibility, technology, and more. This week, I'm very excited to have disability advocate and author and public speaker Christine Ebanks, the special needs mama bear. Thank you, Kristen. How are you today?
Thank you, Katie, for having me. And I am wonderful. Thank you. And good evening to your audience.
Thank you so much for being here today. I am very excited for our interview. So I know we're kind of short on time, so I wanted to ask, you are an advocate for those in the disability communities, more specifically those with CP, right?
Well, those with disabilities specifically, because
Yes.
one of the things that I came to recognize is while the label of the disability or the medical condition might be different, the experience is similar for many
Yes.
families. You have a child, the child has a diagnosis. You have to understand the diagnosis. You have to learn how to navigate systems. And
Mm-hmm.
so, while yes, I would say that my expertise is in cerebral palsy, from the beginning of my advocacy, I have really just sought to represent parents and families of children with disabilities generally.
Okay, cool. Can you talk a little bit about your son Nathan and like some of the biggest lessons he's taught you as a mom?
Okay, so you're taking me back in history. So Nathan, I call him my bambino, is my fourth child. He is now 21, about to turn 22. When he was born, we were living in Jamaica and he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 9 months old. Now, in Jamaica, it's very different from here in the United States or in other countries because Jamaica did not have at the time a disability law on books. There were very, very limited services in support of children with disabilities. And it was a family's responsibility to pay for everything concerning that child's disabilities, from education to diagnosis to whatever it is that the child needs, social services. It was the parent's responsibility. So when Nathan's diagnosis was given, that's all we got, with a list that the neurologist told us of all the things he would never, ever, ever do. And he was only 9 months old. So that robbed me of the joy of a newborn for a long time. It put me in depression for a long time. I thought cerebral palsy was a death sentence and that he would die. And when Nathan turned 2, I realized that I still knew very little about the disability, but even more, I didn't understand what it meant for me as his parent, how I needed to support him. So to fix that,
Wow.
so to fix that, we took a trip to a rehabilitation hospital in Florida, and we had one appointment with a developmental pediatrician who sat down. She was so impressed that I traveled from so far to understand this disability. He got his first diagnosis, real diagnosis with her, and she sat us down for, it could have been 2 hours. Now, this is a specialist appointment, and she sat us down for about 2 hours to break down for me what the disability meant and to give me 9 prescriptions for all of these specialists who we needed to see. And we only had 3 weeks. We had just traveled up for 3 weeks. But she got on the phone and she connected us with the first 2 people we needed to see, which was physical therapy, occupational therapy, actually 3, and speech therapy, who operated in the same center she was in. And then they were so impressed that they called their colleagues in the other areas we needed to see. So people were seeing us after work and people were seeing us during their lunchtime. And one specialist was going on vacation and Nathan needed orthotics. And so he saw us after work. And then he got the lab to rush the preparation of this vest that Nathan needed and AFOs for his feet. And each person took the time to help me understand what the disability meant in that particular area. And they helped me to understand that the difference in my son's life will be dependent on my voice. So that's what got me started. And Nathan was 2 years old at the time.
My goodness. And one of the things that I'm going to say the word admire about you is the fact that you have been able to take his story and like write write books like um children's books and books for parents of kids with disabilities to help them understand what it's really like to have a disability. And while um you may not be in somebody else's shoes, I really feel like you have been able to tap into Nathan's mind, as it were, even though he is nonverbal, because I do want to make the point that even though someone is nonverbal, they still have the ability
Yes,
to communicate with you, even if
yes,
it's just like an eye movement or a sound or something like that, right?
yes, yes.
So, so I really, I've read a couple of your books and I really appreciate that. And I'm sure if Nathan could speak, he would say thanks, Mom.
Thank
Right?
you.
But yes. So and also one of the other things, when you speak, what exactly do you speak about when you speak to corporate America? If that's, you know, something you're comfortable talking about.
Sure, sure. So, in order to do that, let me talk about the book.
Yes.
When I got back to Jamaica after that trip that I mentioned, Nathan was two. I had
Yeah.
met all of these wonderful specialists, and I call it my ray of hope. I felt hopeful for the first time since his birth and his diagnosis. And I got back to Jamaica and I tried to assemble similar professionals by putting on a workshop. And that was when I recognized that we did not have 90% of those professionals in Jamaica. So at the time, I was working with corporate Jamaica. I left my job and I started a foundation. And because I had worked in marketing in corporate Jamaica, there were many business owners and many, presidents of business who knew me and they were moved by our story and they provided some kind of funding support that I could start. I started the Nathan Ebanks Foundation. And as part of that foundation, the media became very fascinated with this mother's story and this mother taking on this role. So I was getting interviews from TV and radio, and I was just on the air just talking about the journey. And people would say to me, why don't you write? You need to write because your story is so inspirational, but your story also has so much information that it will help so many others. And I began to speak into organizations like the Kiwanis Club because they wanted to understand how to support the community of children with disabilities and their families. I began to speak into churches. I began to speak into businesses to help them understand this population from the perspective of families of children with disabilities who might be employed. And so I was just speaking all over the place. I had no background in public speaking. I had no script. I was just speaking from the heart. And I found that when I spoke, the room went silent and I didn't know how to interpret that until a friend of mine said to me, because you speak from such a place of power and so much knowledge that people don't know how to enter into the conversation. If people want, and she said to me also, it sounds like you have everything all figured out. So she said to me, so in order to invite people and enroll, because the whole issue of disability is the societal issue because disability impacts every area of life. It impacts transportation, healthcare, education, social services, products and services. It impacts all areas of life. And so she said, so when you are speaking, you got to consider the audience who might be listening to you. And you have to leave a deposit in them so that they can see what it is that they can do in their sphere to become more inclusive of children and families. And so that's what germinated the idea of writing. And I'm on the ninth book now, and I'll tell you about that. But I wrote, first and foremost, just sharing our story. Because when Nathan was diagnosed and I was looking for hope, I would buy books written by other parents. Either the parents were professionals, so the books were highly technical, or the parents just seemed to have this great faith and have it all together. So I felt like I was failing my son because nobody was experiencing the pain and the sorrow and the darkness and the stress. They didn't seem to experience all of that I was experiencing. So I wanted to write a book that really told the story in a raw and unfiltered way, because if I had found something like that when Nathan was newly diagnosed, it would have saved me a lot of pain. It would have saved me a lot of the stress and trial I went through. And so I started from that perspective. But as companies came close and they began to sponsor my organization, I had to help them write their speech for whether it is an opening ceremony of the event or when I ran conferences and workshops, they would come and speak as a sponsor. I would write their speech for them. So I actually became a speechwriter in that regard, but I also helped them to interpret what disability meant for their organization. And so that kind of launched me as the person to call if you wanted somebody who could really help to articulate or help you understand, how to enter the conversation of disability. And so it kind of flung me out there in an area. But thank goodness I have had some great friends who are public speakers, who are journalists, who were speech therapists, who along the way guided me and helped me to really coin the message. And so now my goal is to sit on the TEDx stage to bring the conversation of disability in a practical and real way into that space.
Wow, that's my goal too. Anyway, but so I guess, we have commonality here. But can you talk about how important it is? And if you want to jump into your, latest book, you can,
Mhm.
but how important it is to have a plan,
Mhm.
as it were, for those who may have disabilities for like the next chapter of life.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Katie, because I just want to share with your audience that's how you and I met. Because
yes,
my son, one of the things that I do, I recognize that there is so much wisdom in parents' experience, and it is the experience of other parents sometimes that has brought me greater clarity around an issue my son was experiencing, especially because he's nonverbal and he can't explain, Mom, this is what is going on with me. And so as he's growing and we encounter a situation or challenges that are consistent with cerebral palsy, which has muscle weakness, it has a lot of other secondary medical situation that comes with it. And also cerebral palsy affects everybody differently. So there are no two people with cerebral palsy that's the same. And
right.
I've had issues like when he struggled with constipation, and it was when he was younger and he was hospitalized several times, and they wanted to give him a bag at his side for his bowel movement because they said his intestine couldn't handle it. And we're like, no, he has too many issues for that to be another one. And his parents who say, oh, have you tried flaxseed oil or have you tried these products? This is what we do with our other parents. And so we were able to find a way to keep him consistent and to avoid that particular fate. So along the way, there was all of these. What I didn't know was that the experience was actually helping me to find a way to thrive as a family and to help my son thrive with this, and I put in quotes disability because there's so much ability that is missed because society tend to focus on what the individual can't do, but
Hmm.
they find ways around the typical way of doing things that is missed. And so I remember, for instance, Nathan did an evaluation with a speech therapist who had no experience with children with cerebral palsy. So with speech, they give you different activities and you must create the same response 4 times at least, 3 to 4 times out of 5 for them to determine that you know that thing. So she asked Nathan, where is the blue? Where's the blue car? And Nathan touched the blue. Good job, Nathan. Nathan, show me the blue car. And Nathan pushed away all the other colors and left the blue. And each of the 5 times, he used a different method to show the blue. And at the end of the day, her report said Nathan did not understand blue because he could not present things to me for 3 out of 4 times, 5 times. So I began to realize that I had to be an interpreter for him because I had to help people explain how he communicates. And
Right.
then what ended up in the report was mother said, and mother said, and mother said. And it frustrated my son because he knew and there was, nobody else to tell him. So what I started doing was spending time just looking at the developmental phase ahead, spending time to understand how he is fitting into that particular milestone, how he is modifying it and creating his own unique way of communicating. And one of the ways that I do that is to talk to other parents in the groups that I'm in to say, hey, my son is turning 6. What are the things that I should be considering for him at age 6? And I remember with you, he was turning 18 and getting ready to transition to adult life. By that time, we had moved to the United States. And I had reached out in the group to say, what are some of the things that I should be considering? What are some of the emotions that he might be having because he can't tell me? And you had reached out to me and we had a great conversation, which helped me so much in helping the school system to create his transition plan in a way that honored who he is and honored where he needs to be and honored the fact that he should be a participant in his own life. And so all of these, I began to realize that I had been creating these systems of thriving for children and for families. And so over the past year, I have been pulling all of these systems and framework together in the upcoming book. My upcoming book, The Special Needs Mama Bear Playbook, Your Game Plan for Thriving Beyond the Diagnosis, which will be available Amazon and bookstores island-wide by the end of summer.
That's amazing. Will it be available on Audible?
Not yet, not yet. But with
Okay.
the technology that is out there now for people, it'll be available in ebook format. So people who actually buy it using the Kindle format or the ebook format, they can actually use
Yeah.
apps now to read. So that's why for
Okay.
all the books that I publish, they're both in print and ebook format.
Okay, cool. Because that's primarily how I read books now is like the ebook format or the audio format
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, we're always on the go, right? So
Yes.
it's more convenient, I will say. And so, what is one thing that you wish society would understand about Nathan?
That's such a great question because there's so many one things that's bubbling up for me.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'd wish society to understand is that he is not his disability. There's a young lady with cerebral palsy who wrote a poem when she was 12, and it says, cerebral palsy is what I have, it is not who I am. Because systems, even where you have specialists who should know better, they tend to see the individual as a disability. And what do I mean by that? Nathan will be in a session. And I remember he was sitting in a neurologist's office and she had some papers on her desk and they were dangling near where his feet was. And he kicked it off the desk and she picked it up and she put it back on the desk. And she put it back right where it was. And I said to her, you just initiated play. And she said, no, that was a tick. That was because he has cerebral palsy and he can't control his muscles. And she put it right back and he kicked it right back
Yeah.
off. And it happened for maybe about 6, 7 times. The last time she bent down to pick up the paper, she looked up and saw he was smiling, grinning from ear to ear. And she said to me, oh, mommy was right. You were playing. And so I find that when an individual has a disability, people tend to see them as their disability and they make assumptions about who they are and what they can do and what they can't do rather than see them as a unique expression in the earth and see them as an individual and try to get to know them. They make assumptions. So I've gone to places where people say to me, it doesn't make any sense for your son to come because he can't understand. And I say, he can understand more than you think. He's not able to express it using words. but he can understand. So
Oh
I
my
always
goodness.
have to be a voice to present him to
Yeah.
the world. I go to places and people talk to me and not him. He's invisible. And I have to say to them, he's right here and he's saying hi. And he's looking at you with his eyes. That's him making connection with you and saying hi. So I've had to be teaching people how to relate and respond. And I find that once they begin to understand him, people would come to me and say, your son is so smart. And I'm like, I know, because they're finally able to see beyond the label of the disability or the
Hmm.
physical presentation of the disability and recognize that an individual is there. And that's the message that I carry because each of us are unique in our own way, whether or not we have a disability. And we want people to accept us as we are. But once somebody's different and present different, then we begin to make a lot of assumptions that create barriers for accessibility for these individuals.
Yes. And I feel like that is such a good way to end it because people with disabilities are very unique and our disabilities are not who we are.
Hmm.
So feel free to like help us branch out and give us the tools that we need to succeed.
Hmm.
But that's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there any final closing remarks that you'd like to share with the
Yes.
audience?
Yes. So I just like to share with the audience that they can find my book, Christine Staple Ebanks, on Amazon. There are several books that I have: Raising Nathan Against All Odds, Discovering the Blessings, Joy, and Purpose in Raising a Child with Disabilities, won an International Impact Award 2 years ago for how it really brings the conversation of disability into a general space. I also have several children's book, including I'm Just Like You But Different, a story about living with cerebral palsy, which is a book that helps young children understand the value of friendship for children with disabilities. And for people who want to find me, I have a YouTube channel, the Special Needs Mama Bear. And that channel carries a lot of content, a lot of the advocacy work that I do, a lot of information for parents and families about the different aspects of raising individuals with disabilities. I also have a Facebook page, the Special Needs Mama Bear, which is a community of mamas and papas who are raising children with disabilities. And people can contact me at contact@thespecialneedsmamabear.com, and I'd be very happy to answer questions or to provide more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much for volunteering to do this today, and I hope to work with you in the future if that's okay.
Thank you, Katie, and congratulations on the podcast. And I look
Thank you
forward
so
to
much.
continuing to work with you. Great job.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.